Imagine you're driving down the highway, right? And suddenly your check engine light flashes red.
Never a good feeling.
No, it's the worst. But, I mean, would you fix that problem by just grabbing a piece of black tape and sticking it over the light on your dashboard so you can't see it anymore?
I mean, I hope not. That would destroy the engine.
Right, because the light isn't the problem. The light is just an alert. But the crazy thing is, this is exactly how modern medicine treats one of the most common conditions in the entire world, eczema.
Yeah, it really is a perfect analogy.
Because if you walk into a dermatologist's office today with, severe, cracked, oozing eczema, there is a 99% chance they're going to prescribe a treatment that completely ignores the actual engine. They'll look at the red skin on your arms or your face, and they'll just treat the skin.
Which is a fundamental misdirection of medical attention. I mean, we are treating the smoke and ignoring the fire entirely.
Exactly. The central premise of the research we're diving into today makes a really bold, kind of paradigm-shifting claim. And that claim is that eczema is not a skin condition. It is a gut failure.
It's an internal failure.
I was trying to conceptualize this, and it made me think about a modern, ultra-sensitive home security system.
Okay, I'm with you.
So imagine your immune system is that network of sensors. Now imagine those sensors just become completely miscalibrated. They get hyper-reactive. So a single leaf blows past the living room window, and the system registers it as this massive threat, and it triggers the indoor fire sprinklers.
Oh, wow.
Right, and suddenly your living room drywall is soaked, it's ruined, it's growing mold. Modern dermatology, in this scenario, is basically handing you a bucket of white paint and telling you to just paint over the wet drywall.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it because, painting the drywall might make it look acceptable for a week or so, but the structural rot is actively worsening behind the wall.
Yeah, the wall is still rotting.
Exactly. And more importantly, you haven't recalibrated the sensors. So the very next time a leaf blows by, the sprinklers are going to go off again.
And, we are not talking about some fringe issue here that affects a tiny handful of people. Looking at our source material, eczema, or clinically atopic dermatitis, is a chronic, systemic inflammatory condition. And it affects over 200 million people worldwide.
It's a massive, massive population.
200 million. I mean, if you're one of them, or if you love someone who is, the absolute physical agony of this, we're talking about skin that is so insanely itchy it completely disrupts your sleep.
Right.
Skin that cracks open, that bleeds, and just the deep emotional exhaustion that comes with it.
The timeline is what makes it particularly devastating, I think. This isn't, a temporary rash you get from brushing against poison ivy. For a lot of people, it initiates in early childhood.
Yeah, the classic childhood eczema.
Right. But rather than resolving as the immune system matures, which is what we'd hope, it persists. It vanishes and then reappears throughout adulthood in this really relentless, unpredictable cycle. It leaves people feeling entirely out of control of their own biology.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission for this deep dive is to completely dismantle that traditional view of skin health.
Yes.
We're going to map out the exact microscopic biology of what is actually happening beneath the surface. We'll trace the pathology all the way from the microbiome in your digestive tract, through the bloodstream, and finally to the epidermal layer.
It's a fascinating journey.
It really is. And we aren't just going to diagnose the problem here. We're going to synthesize all of this source material into a targeted 7-step biological blueprint to heal this from the inside out.
Because the goal here is physiological literacy. We want to move away from just, throwing random supplements or creams at a symptom.
Right. No more guessing.
Exactly. We need to understand the biological mechanisms, the actual why and the how, so that you can make informed, highly specific interventions.
So, to you listening, whether you've struggled with eczema your entire life, or you're just endlessly curious about how the hidden, highly sophisticated machinery of the human body works, you're going to walk away from this with a completely new framework.
A total paradigm shift.
Yeah. So let's start with the first major theme from the sources. We're calling it the Great Skin Deception. Why exactly is this traditional, localized approach failing so spectacularly?
Well, it fails because it's based on a really reductionist view of the human body. When a patient presents with an acute eczema flare, the standard of care is topical intervention.
Creams and ointments.
Right. You get prescribed topical corticosteroids or maybe topical calcineurin inhibitors, which are basically local immunosuppressants, and heavy emollient moisturizers.
Now, I want to be fair here, because if someone is in absolute agony, A steroid cream is going to calm that redness down rapidly. It shuts off those fire sprinklers for a minute.
Oh, absolutely. Steroids work by literally paralyzing the local immune cells in the skin.
Wow, paralyzing them.
Yeah, specifically the Langerhans cells and other antigen-presenting cells. They forcefully suppress the transcription of inflammatory genes in that specific geographic area on your arm or your neck. So yes, you get immediate symptomatic relief.
But the catch is.
The critical flaw is that this intervention is entirely superficial. Eczema, as our primary source perfectly defines it, is a visual signal of deeper dysfunction.
A visual signal of deeper dysfunction. That is the core shift right there.
What's fascinating here is that the medical establishment actually fully acknowledges that atopic dermatitis is a systemic, inflammatory, immune-mediated disease.
They know it's full body.
They know. Yet the frontline treatment literally stops at the physical boundary of the skin. Eczema is an active, full-body immune response. Your systemic immune network is mounting a massive, coordinated attack, and your skin just happens to be the battlefield where the casualties are visible.
I was reading through the clinical history of these treatments, and it struck me how counterintuitive the long-term steroid use actually is. Not only are you just painting over the wet drywall, but topical steroids actually thin the skin over time.
Yes, they do. They atrophy the epidermis.
So the very treatment used to suppress the symptom actually weakens the physical barrier of the skin, making you more susceptible to future flare-ups.
That phenomenon is called topical steroid withdrawal. And it is a massive issue. When you artificially suppress the local immune response for years and then you try to stop, the body often rebounds.
It freaks out.
Exactly, with an inflammatory response that is exponentially worse than the original condition. And this just proves that you haven't solved the underlying physiological math.
Okay, so if the skin is just the symptom, if it's just the ruined drywall in the living room, we have to go looking for the miscalibrated security system. Where is the true origin point of this systemic fire?
To find the origin, we have to reconsider a really old nutritional cliche, which is, you are what you eat.
Oh man, the ultimate dietary guilt trip.
Right, but biologically speaking, it's actually completely inaccurate.
Really?
Yeah, you are not what you eat. You are what you absorb, what you metabolize, and what you fail to excrete.
Oh, I like that.
Think about it. You could consume the most pristine, organic, hyper-nutrient-dense diet on the planet. But if your internal processing facility is compromised, those nutrients are useless.
He's passed right through.
Exactly. And more dangerously, the environmental toxins and waste products are not being filtered out. So the true origin of this systemic fire is your digestive tract.
So the gut-skin axis. This is where the biology gets truly incredible. Because according to the research, nearly 80% of your entire immune system resides in your gut.
80%.
80%. I think the layperson's view of the immune system is like a bunch of white blood cells floating around the bloodstream like police cars on patrol. But the reality is that the vast majority of our defense forces are permanently stationed in the digestive tract. Why are you there?
It really comes down to evolutionary biology and the actual physical topology of the human body. Think of the gastrointestinal tract not as being inside your body, but rather as a hollow tube that runs from your mouth to the other end.
Okay.
Functionally, the inside of your gut is actually the outside world passing through you.
That is a wild way to think about it.
Yeah.
You basically say we're a very complex donut.
Precisely. The hole in the middle of the donut is exposed to the outside air. Your gut is the primary border crossing, where the outside world, foreign proteins, bacteria, viruses, environmental toxins, comes into direct, intimate contact with just a single layer of cells that separates it from your sterile bloodstream.
So it's at the front line.
Exactly. Therefore, the body has literally no choice but to place its heaviest, most aggressive immune security force right there at that border.
And this border patrol is in constant communication with the skin.
Yes, through what we call the gut-skin axis. They share this profound immunological language. Now, regulating in this 80% of your immune system is your microbiome, the trillions of bacteria that live inside that hollow tube.
Right, the gut bugs.
But the sources point out a glaring commonality here. Eczema sufferers almost universally exhibit severe gut dysbiosis.
Dysbiosis, meaning the microbial ecosystem is completely out of balance.
Correct. But it's not just an overgrowth of bad pathogenic bacteria. It's often a catastrophic lack of bacterial diversity. Specifically, the data highlights a frequent stark absence of protective strains, like Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium.
Now, I know those specific names get slapped on every single yogurt commercial on television,
Yeah.
but I want to get past the marketing here. What are these specific strains actually doing on a biochemical level that prevents my skin from oozing?
Those specific bacterial families act as the peacekeepers of the gut. When you feed them complex fibers, they ferment them, and they produce these byproducts called short-chain fatty acids, specifically one called butyrate. Yes, butyrate is the primary fuel source for the cells lining your gut. It keeps them healthy, it keeps the local inflammation low, and it sends systemic chemical signals to the skin to maintain its barrier function.
So it's basically food for the wall.
Exactly. When you lack lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, you lack butyrate. The peacekeepers are gone.
And when the peacekeepers are gone, the border wall starts to crumble. Which brings us to a term I hear thrown around by wellness influencers constantly: leaky gut.
Ah.
I will be honest, it often sounds like a pseudoscientific buzzword. But the mechanics laid out in these papers are deeply rooted in hard cellular biology. Convince me this is a real physiological mechanism.
I completely understand the skepticism. The term leaky gut sounds, frankly, entirely unscientific.
It sounds made up.
Right, but in the clinical literature, it is referred to as increased intestinal permeability. Let's look at the actual cellular structure. The lining of your intestines is a single layer of epithelial cells.
Just one cell thick.
Just one microscopic cell thick. And these cells are glued together by complex protein networks called tight junctions. Specifically, these proteins known as claudins and occludins.
So these claudin and occludin proteins are basically the mortar holding the border wall together.
Exactly. In a healthy gut, this wall is highly selective. It only allows perfectly broken down, microscopic, single molecule nutrients, like a single amino acid or a single glucose molecule, to pass through those tight junctions and enter the bloodstream.
Everything else.
Everything larger undigested food, bacteria, toxins is blocked and ultimately excreted.
But when you have dysbiosis, when you don't have those peacekeepers producing butyrate, what happens?
The environment becomes highly inflammatory, and this inflammation triggers the release of a protein called zonulin. Zonulin's specific biological job is to unlock those tight junctions. It physically dissolves the claudins and occludins, so the cells literally pull apart. The wall now has microscopic holes in it.
So increased intestinal permeability.
Yes. And here's where the systemic fire begins. Because those gaps are now open, large, complex molecules that were supposed to stay inside the digestive tract, like, say, a partially digested chain of proteins from your lunch, or bacterial endotoxins slip right through the wall and drop directly into your systemic blood circulation.
Wait, I really want to pause and emphasize this, because this is the massive aha moment for me.
Go for it.
If I have increased intestinal permeability, a literal, physical, partially digested piece of food physically escapes my digestive tube, floops into my bloodstream where it fundamentally does not belong, and my body's reaction to that rogue floating protein is to make my arms break out in a red, itchy rash.
That is the exact sequence of events.
It is insane.
It is. When that rogue protein enters the blood, that massive immune system stationed at the border detects it immediately. But it doesn't recognize a partially digested protein chain as lunch. The immune system only recognizes chemical signatures. So it sees a massive unknown protein structure in the sterile bloodstream, and it identifies it as an antigen, a foreign invader, no different than a virus.
So the security system freaks out. Sprinklers go off.
It mounts a massive, systemic, inflammatory attack to destroy the invader. It floods your bloodstream with cytokines and inflammatory mediators. And because of the intimate connection of the gut-skin axis, that internal chemical warfare gets pushed out to the periphery.
Oh, to the skin.
Yes. The internal fire manifests externally as atopic dermatitis. As the source material bluntly states, if your gut is inflamed, your skin will follow.
Which makes the idea of treating this purely with a topical skin cream look completely absurd. You're putting out a match on your arm while a flamethrower is actively firing in your bloodstream.
Precisely. You simply cannot achieve lasting remission of eczema without reestablishing the integrity of the intestinal epithelium.
Okay, so this brings up a massive question regarding the actual mechanics of this internal fire. When these rogue proteins leak into the blood, how exactly does the immune system sound the alarm? What is the actual chemical messenger that tells the skin to become inflamed and itchy?
That brings us to one of the most critical and often misunderstood molecules in the human body, histamine.
Now, histamine is a word everyone knows, but mostly in the context of taking an antihistamine in the spring because the pollen is making you sneeze. It's almost always associated with seasonal allergies. But our sources are treating histamine as a primary driver of chronic eczema.
Histamine has a terrible reputation, honestly, but it's actually a vital, brilliantly multifaceted compound. Your body produces it naturally and absolutely requires it to survive.
Really, what else does it do?
It acts as a neurotransmitter in the brain, regulating wakefulness. It stimulates the release of stomach acid so you can actually digest your food. And yes, it is a primary mediator of immunity and inflammation.
So it's not inherently evil, it's just a tool.
It's a signaling molecule. When there is tissue damage or a foreign invader, local immune cells called mast cells release histamine. The histamine causes nearby blood vessels to dilate and become leaky, which allows white blood cells to rush into the area and fix the problem.
Oh, that makes sense.
It's supposed to be a localized, highly controlled, temporary response. The problem with eczema is that the histamine response becomes chronic, systemic, and overwhelming.
The sources reference a really specific and fascinating study published in 2018 in the journal Mediators of Inflammation. They dug deep into how histamine actually interacts with our cells, and I'd love to break down the biochemistry here.
This study is foundational for understanding chronic skin conditions. The researchers analyzed the specific receptors on our cells that histamine binds to.
Like lock and key.
Exactly. They identified 4 distinct types of histamine receptors labeled H1 through H4, and they all triggered different physiological responses when histamine docks into them.
Okay, let's contrast them, specifically H1 and H4, because those seem to be the primary actors here.
Right. So the H1 receptors are the ones mediating the acute allergic responses we're all familiar with. When histamine docks into an H1 receptor on a sensory nerve in your skin, it immediately triggers the sensation of intense itchiness.
That classic allergy itch.
Exactly. It triggers the rapid vasodilation that causes sudden redness and swelling. If you take a standard over-the-counter allergy pill like Benadryl or Claritin, you are taking an H1 antagonist. It physically blocks the H1 receptor so histamine can't dock there.
So H1 is the acute, immediate alarm.
Correct. But the breakthrough in this 2018 study was the role of the H4 receptors in chronic eczema. The H4 receptors aren't just about a quick itch. They are located heavily on immune cells, like eosinophils and T cells.
And what do?
When histamine continuously binds to H4 receptors, it actively recruits more and more inflammatory immune cells to the skin barrier. It upregulates the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
The H4 receptor is what turns a temporary allergic reaction into a chronic, self-sustaining inflammatory loop. Eczema sufferers are literally trapped in this loop. Their H4 receptors are locked in the on position, constantly demanding more inflammation, fundamentally altering the architecture of the skin over time.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I've spoken to so many people with severe eczema who are incredibly disciplined. They'll tell me, look, I got the scratch test. I'm allergic to dairy and dust mites. I have ruthlessly eliminated dairy. I bought a HEPA filter. I wash my sheets in boiling water, and I am still breaking out in a massive rash.
Yeah.
What you're saying about this histamine loop explains this entirely. It's not just about the specific allergen anymore.
That is the tragedy of focusing solely on elimination diets without fixing the underlying biology. Think of your body's total capacity to handle histamine as a bucket.
A histamine bucket.
Right. We all have a histamine bucket. Every time you encounter an allergen or experience severe psychological stress or eat a food that naturally contains histamine, you are pouring water into that bucket.
But a healthy person doesn't overflow.
Because a healthy person has a highly functional drain at the bottom of the bucket. That drain is a system of enzymes, primarily one called diamine oxidase, or DAO, and DAO is produced in the healthy lining of the gut. As fast as the histamine enters the body, the DAO enzyme chemically breaks it down and flushes it out.
But for the person with eczema?
For the person with eczema, because their gut lining is destroyed by dysbiosis and zonulin, they are not producing enough of that DAO enzyme. Their drain is plugged.
Oh.
So the bucket fills up with baseline, everyday histamine, and it quickly overflows. Once the bucket is overflowing, histamine is constantly spilling into the bloodstream, constantly docking into those H4 receptors, and maintaining the inflammation.
So if your drain is plugged, just cutting out a glass of red wine, which is super high in histamine, isn't going to save you. You're just taking a teacup of water out of a bucket that is already overflowing.
Exactly.
You have to physically repair the drain.
Exactly. You have to upregulate your clearance pathways.
Okay, so this brings up a very logical transition. If histamine is the match and a leaky gut is the arsonist, throwing matches into the bloodstream, why doesn't everyone with a terrible diet get eczema? I know people who eat nothing but ultra-processed garbage. Their gut has to be a mess, but they don't have a single patch of dry skin. There has to be a structural vulnerability at the surface level that makes the eczema sufferer's skin more flammable.
That is a highly astute observation, and it leads us directly into the concept of the micronutrient armor. Biology is basically a series of chemical reactions, and those reactions require very specific molecular raw materials. If you lack the materials to build the physical barrier of the skin, the systemic inflammation has a much easier time destroying it. The source material outlines 3 critical nutrient deficiencies almost universally found in chronic eczema patients.
Let's do a deep dive into these because they go way beyond the standard take a daily multivitamin advice.
Oh, absolutely.
The first one is vitamin D3. Now, we know it's technically a hormone. We know it's synthesized via sunlight. But what is the actual cellular mechanism connecting vitamin D3 to skin integrity?
Vitamin D3 regulates massive portions of the immune system. At the skin level, it controls the expression of antimicrobial peptides like cathelicidins.
Cathelicidins, what are those?
They're essentially your skin's endogenous antibiotics. They fight off the golden staph bacteria that constantly try to colonize eczema-prone skin. But the most critical structural role of vitamin D3 is that it drives the production of a protein called filigrin.
Filigrin, I saw this heavily emphasized in the research. What exactly is filigrin doing?
The outermost layer of your skin, the stratum corneum, is often described as a brick and mortar structure. The dead skin cells are the bricks.
Okay, making sense.
Filigrin is the key protein that folds and binds with keratin fibers to create the structural matrix, the mortar, that seals those bricks together. It creates a waterproof, impenetrable barrier.
So when you are deficient in vitamin D3,
Your cellular machinery cannot transcribe enough filigrin. The mortar crumbles, the stratum corneum literally becomes porous and physically compromised.
it's a leaky wall mirroring the leaky gut.
Precisely. And because it's leaky, transepidermal water loss skyrockets. The moisture in your skin literally evaporates out through the microscopic cracks, which is why eczema skin is so profoundly, painfully dry.
It just can't hold water.
Right. At the same time, microscopic irritants from the environment dust, pet dander, pollution slip into those cracks and trigger the immune cells waiting just below the surface.
Wait, I was looking at the epidemiology of eczema, and this just clicked perfectly for me. Eczema notoriously has massive flare-ups in the dead of winter. Patients constantly complain that January and February are their worst months. It's not just because the indoor heating makes the air dry, it's because in the winter, in the northern hemisphere, ambient UVB radiation drops. We stay indoors, our vitamin D3 levels absolutely plummet, our filigrin production grinds to a halt, and suddenly, the physical mortar of our skin barrier just dissolves.
That is exactly the biochemical chain of events. It is a structural collapse driven by a seasonal micronutrient deficiency. And this perfectly illustrates why putting a moisturizer on top of skin that has structurally failed to produce filigrin is nothing more than a temporary superficial band-aid.
Incredible. Okay, the second micronutrient on the list is zinc.
Zinc is the ultimate cellular repairman. It is a required cofactor for over 300 distinct enzymatic reactions in the human body, particularly those involved in cellular division, DNA synthesis, and wound healing.
And eczema is basically a wound.
Eczema, when it cracks open, is functionally an open wound. The body demands massive amounts of zinc to rapidly divide epithelial cells and heal that tissue.
I was actually reading a study on zinc absorption, and it creates this terrifying catch-22 for the eczema patient.
Oh, the malabsorption issue.
Yes. Zinc is primarily absorbed in the small intestine, but if your gut lining is inflamed and damaged by dysbiosis, the leaky gut we discussed, your ability to actually absorb zinc drops significantly. So the worse your gut gets, the more your skin breaks down, and the less able you are to absorb the exact mineral required to repair the damage.
It is a vicious downward biological spiral, and it's compounded by the fact that modern agricultural soils are deeply depleted of zinc, making dietary intake insufficient for many to begin with.
It just stacks against you. The third piece of the armor mentioned is omega-3 fatty acids. How are these functioning differently than zinc or vitamin D?
Omega-3s operate directly at the level of the cell membrane. Every single cell in your body, including your skin cells, is encased in a lipid bilayer, which is a flexible wall made of fats. In the modern Western diet, we consume a massive excess of omega-6 fatty acids, specifically arachidonic acid. And that gets incorporated into these cell walls and acts as a precursor for highly inflammatory signaling molecules called prostaglandins.
So our cell walls are literally built out of pro-inflammatory material.
Yes. But when you consume high amounts of bioavailable omega-3s like EPA and DHA from marine sources, They physically replace the arachidonic acid in the lipid bilayer of your skin cells.
And what does that do?
This is two things. First, it makes the cell membrane more fluid, flexible, and hydrated so it doesn't crack under pressure. And secondly, it shifts the cellular machinery away from producing inflammatory prostaglandins, directly quenching the fire at the cellular level.
Wow. So to summarize the pathology before we move into the solution, we have a hollow tube, the gut, where the peacekeeper bacteria have been wiped out. The lack of butyrate causes inflammation, which triggers zonulin to dissolve the tight junctions. Undigested proteins leak into the blood. The 80% immune system stationed there freaks out, launching a systemic inflammatory war. The body dumps histamine to sound the alarm, but the DAO enzyme drain is plugged, so the histamine bucket overflows, locking the H4 receptors into a chronic inflammatory loop. And this internal fire finally reaches the skin, which easily cracks and oozes because it is fundamentally starved of vitamin D3, zinc, and omega-3s.
That is a flawlessly accurate end-to-end biological summary of what atopic dermatitis actually is.
Okay. We know exactly how the engine is failing.
Right.
We know where the rot is behind the drywall. How do we actually intervene? The second half of our source material lays out a highly specific 7-step biological blueprint to reverse this pathology. I want to make sure we don't just list these off like a table of contents, but actually explore the mechanics of how this protocol physically repairs the damage we just described.
Absolutely. The protocol is phased. You cannot start rebuilding the house while the arsonist is still inside throwing matches. The intervention must start with the cessation of harm.
Right, which leads into the first phase, removing the gut disruptors. If the tight junctions are being forced open, we have to stop ingesting the chemicals that trigger that opening. The sources list a few primary culprits: processed sugar, seed oils, gluten, and conventional dairy. Now, everyone knows sugar is inflammatory, but I want to push on the others. Why are seed oils and gluten specifically tearing the gut apart?
Well, industrial seed oils like soybean, canola, and cottonseed oil are extracted using high heat and chemical solvents. They are highly unstable polyunsaturated fats, specifically linoleic acid.
Unstable meaning what?
Because they're so unstable, they oxidize incredibly easily inside the body. This oxidation creates a massive storm of free radicals that directly damage the fragile epithelial cells lining the gut.
And gluten. Why is that on the list?
For a significant portion of the population with compromised guts, the gliadin protein found in modern hybridized wheat directly stimulates the overproduction of zonulin.
Ah, the exact protein that dissolves the claudins and agglutins.
Precisely. Ingesting gluten, for someone with a damaged gut, is literally swallowing a biochemical key that unlocks the tight junctions and creates intestinal permeability. Similarly, conventional dairy contains a protein called A1 casein, which can act as a severe inflammatory trigger in a sensitized immune system.
The sources also suggest implementing a 2 to 4 week low histamine trial. And the list of foods to avoid is fascinating because it's not just unhealthy food. It says to cut out wine, aged cheese, canned fish, and leftovers.
Yeah, the leftovers always get people.
I have to admit, the leftovers part stopped me in my tracks. Why on earth would last night's chicken breast cause an eczema flare today?
It sounds bizarre until you look at the microbiology of food storage. Histamine is not just produced by your body, it's produced by bacteria breaking down an amino acid called histidine.
Oh, interesting.
This is a natural decay process. When you cook a piece of chicken, the histamine level is near zero, but if you put it in a Tupperware container in the fridge, the bacteria immediately go to work. 3 days later, that same piece of chicken is teeming with massive amounts of newly generated histamine.
So if your DAO enzyme drain is already plugged, eating a 3-day-old meal prep is essentially dumping a bucket of pure histamine straight into your bloodstream, guaranteeing an H4 receptor flare-up.
Exactly. This is why strict adherence to freshly cooked food is a non-negotiable phase of repairing the histamine clearance pathways.
Okay, so we've stopped the arsonist, we removed the zonulin triggers and the histamine bombs. Now we have to actually patch the drywall. We have to seal the leaky gut. The sources recommend highly specific interventions here: bone broth, perfect aminos, and L-glutamine. Let's talk biochemistry. How does L-glutamine physically patch a microscopic hole in my intestine?
Okay, so the cells that make up your intestinal wall are called enterocytes. Unlike most cells in your body that use glucose for energy, enterocytes heavily prefer the amino acid L-glutamine to generate ATP, their cellular energy.
They prefer it over sugar.
Right. When your gut is damaged, the enterocytes are starving and exhausted. Supplementing with high doses of L-glutamine directly feeds these specific cells, giving them the massive energy required to rapidly divide, regenerate, and synthesize new claudin proteins to pull those tight junctions back together.
It's literally providing the exact fuel the Border Patrol needs to rebuild the wall. And the bone broth, what's the role there?
Bone broth provides high concentrations of collagen and gelatin. These complex proteins break down into the exact structural amino acids, glycine, proline, hydroxyproline, that form the physical scaffolding of the mucosal lining itself.
Now, I notice a huge caveat in the source material regarding this rebuilding phase. It mentions fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, coconut yogurt, which are universally touted as the ultimate gut healers. But the text explicitly warns, add these only if you are not currently reacting to histamine. Why the massive warning label?
This raises an important question about timing and context in biology. Fermented foods are incredible for a healthy microbiome because they're packed with beneficial probiotics. However, the very process of fermentation is entirely dependent on bacteria breaking down proteins,
Which generates histamine.
which, as we just discussed with the leftovers, generates enormous concentrated amounts of histamine.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly. If you have severe eczema and an overflowing histamine bucket, eating a bowl of sauerkraut to heal your gut is going to trigger a catastrophic skin flare-up. You have to seal the gut wall and restore the DAO enzyme drain first. Only then can you safely introduce fermented foods to reseed the microbiome. It is the right intervention, but if applied at the wrong time, it causes immense suffering.
That nuance is literally the difference between healing and endless frustration. Okay, as we're rebuilding this wall, the sources emphasize optimizing hydration and minerals. But it's highly specific. It doesn't just say drink 8 glasses of water. It mandates morning lemon water with Baja Gold sea salt and sipping hydrogen-rich water. Why are we getting so granular about water?
Because drinking plain purified tap water does not equal cellular hydration. To pull a water molecule from your bloodstream through the lipid bilayer and into the intracellular fluid of a skin cell, you require osmotic pressure. And that pressure is created by trace minerals and electrolytes.
And our modern water is completely stripped of them.
Entirely stripped. And standard table salt is heavily processed and bleached, containing really only sodium and chloride. High-quality, unrefined sea salts like Baja Gold contain over 70 trace minerals. A pinch of that in your water provides the exact electrolytic gradient your cells need to physically absorb the hydration.
In the hydrogen water, using those H2 tablets, this is having a massive moment in the longevity space right now. But how does it relate to eczema?
Molecular hydrogen, or H2, is the smallest molecule in the universe. Because of its microscopic size, it easily diffuses across the cell membrane and directly enters the mitochondria and the nucleus.
And it acts as an antioxidant, right?
It is a highly selective antioxidant. It specifically targets and neutralizes the most toxic free radicals, like the hydroxyl radical, that are driving that systemic H4-mediated inflammation, without interfering with the beneficial signaling molecules the immune system needs. It's a highly targeted fire extinguisher at the cellular level.
So we are stacking these massive physiological wins. We've stopped the damage. We are fueling the enterocytes to rebuild the wall. We're hydrating the cells. But if we go back to the histamine backlog, the drain is still plugged. How do we artificially support the breakdown of histamine while the gut is still healing?
This is where targeted supplementation becomes brilliant. You can literally supplement the missing enzyme. The source recommends taking a DAO-diamine oxidase enzyme supplement 5 to 10 minutes before you eat a meal.
How does that physically work? Does it enter the blood?
No, and that's the beauty of it. The DAO enzyme supplement stays in the digestive tract. When you eat food that contains histamine, the supplemental DAO acts as a chemical scavenger. It chemically deaminates the histamine molecule. It rips the imine group right off of it, neutralizing it inside the gut tube before it can ever cross the barrier into your bloodstream and trigger the H4 receptors on your skin.
Wow, it's a localized chemical interceptor.
Exactly. And the source crucially notes that DAO requires cofactors to function efficiently, specifically vitamin B6 and vitamin C.
So you need those too.
Yes, if you are deficient in B6, your body cannot activate the DAO enzyme, whether you produce it naturally or take it as a supplement. It is a highly interdependent chemical symphony.
Okay, this next part of the protocol is where I usually roll my eyes because every health article on the internet says it. Step 5. Manage stress. It always feels like a throwaway line. But based on this incredibly intricate gut-skin biology we've mapped out, how does my boss yelling at me or me worrying about my mortgage physically cause my skin to crack open?
It is not a psychological phenomenon. It is a hardwired autonomic reflex. The autonomic nervous system has two primary branches: the sympathetic fight-or-flight state and the parasympathetic rest and digest state. When you experience chronic psychological stress, your brain floods the system with cortisol and adrenaline, locking you in a sympathetic state.
You are physiologically running from a tiger.
And from an evolutionary standpoint, if you are running from a tiger, your body decides that digesting your lunch, producing DAO enzymes, and synthesizing filigrin for your skin are absolute zero priorities. Your body physically shunts blood flow away from the gastrointestinal mucosa and diverts it to your skeletal muscles and lungs.
Oh my God.
Yes, stomach acid production plummets, gut motility slows down. The lack of blood flow starves the enterocytes of oxygen. This creates the ultimate stagnant environment for pathogenic bacteria to overgrow, for food to rot and ferment into massive amounts of histamine, and for the tight junctions to completely fail. Chronic stress literally paralyzes the machinery required to heal the gut-skin axis.
So if you're chronically stressed, you can take all the L-glutamine and DAO enzymes in the world, and it won't matter because your body has fundamentally paused the healing sequence.
Absolutely. You have to actively, manually override the autonomic nervous system. The sources suggest breathwork, light post-meal walks, and guided meditation to forcefully shift the nervous system back into the parasympathetic state, restoring blood flow to the gut so the biochemical repairs can actually take place.
Which flows perfectly into the next phase.
Well,
Prioritizing sleep. Sleep is the ultimate parasympathetic state, right?
it is the only time the cleanup crew is allowed to work. The cellular repairmen, the zinc, the amino acids patching the gut wall, they do their heavy lifting during deep, slow-wave sleep. If you are sleep deprived, you are denying the biology the actual time it requires to execute the repairs.
The practical advice here is super specific. It's not just go to bed early. It talks about shutting down screens to protect melatonin production, keeping the room extremely cool, even recommending temperature-regulating mattress covers like the 8 Sleep. Why is temperature such a massive lever for this?
Because sleep architecture is heavily dictated by core body temperature. To enter and remain in deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep, your core temperature must drop by about 1 to 2 degrees.
And if your room is hot?
If your environment is too hot or you are trapped under heavy blankets, which is miserable if your skin is already hot, inflamed, and itchy, your brain will continuously pull you out of deep sleep into lighter sleep stages to try and thermoregulate. You completely shatter the biological repair window. Cooling the sleeping environment artificially locks you into those regenerative cycles.
Okay, so we've run through the active repair phases. The fire is out, the wall is patched. The final step is restore and rebuild. This is long-term maintenance. How do we ensure the miscalibrated security system doesn't just crash again the next time we get stressed or eat something wrong?
You have to plant a resilient, highly diverse microbial garden in the gut. The sources recommend a multi-strain nightly probiotic. They specifically mention a product called Body Health Gut Restore as a functional example, to aggressively reintroduce those missing lactobacillus and bifidobacterium peacekeepers we talked about in the very beginning.
And keeping up with digestive enzymes with meals, just to ensure no large rogue protein chains make it down to the lower intestine intact. But what struck me about this final phase is the emphasis on prebiotics, not just probiotics. What is the distinction?
Probiotics are the live bacteria. Prebiotics are the food that those bacteria eat to survive, multiply, and produce that magical butyrate. Probiotics without prebiotics is like throwing seeds onto dry concrete. You have to provide the soil.
The sources specifically list foods like sweet potatoes, leeks, chia seeds, and asparagus.
Yes. These contain specific types of complex, indigestible fibers like inulin and resistant starch. Human digestive enzymes cannot break them down. They travel completely intact through the stomach and small intestine, arriving in the colon where they act as an absolute feast for the newly planted beneficial bacteria,
Building up the defense forces.
ensuring that the microbial ecosystem remains dense, robust, and capable of defending the gut-skin axis against future insults.
So what does this all mean? We have taken a journey that started on the surface of an agonizing, itchy red rash, and we traced it all the way down into the cellular tight junctions of the intestinal epithelium, the chemistry of the diamine oxidase enzyme, and the genetic transcription of skin barrier proteins.
It means that the standard model of care is deeply flawed. But more importantly, it means that eczema is not a life sentence. The ultimate synthesized takeaway from this entire stack of research is that atopic dermatitis is a highly accurate external dashboard reflecting the internal chaos of your gut lining, your histamine clearance capacity, and your nutritional bioavailability.
Healing simply has to start from within. Prescribing a steroid cream is putting a piece of black tape over the miscalibrated security sensor. It doesn't stop the sprinklers from ruining the house. By removing the zonulin triggers, fueling the enterocytes, supporting the DAO pathways, and shifting into a parasympathetic state, you're physically rebuilding the structural integrity of your biology. And the most empowering part of diving this deep into the science is the realization that your body desperately wants to heal.
Oh, completely. It has the machinery. You just have to stop poisoning the environment and give it the raw biochemical tools it requires.
It's a message of profound physiological agency. You are not at the mercy of your genes. You are in control of your cellular environment.
Absolutely.
Now, as we wrap up this incredibly deep dive, there's one final, slightly provocative thought that I couldn't shake while I was reading through these immunology papers. It's not explicitly stated in the text, but it is the logical extreme of everything we just mapped out. If our skin barrier is truly just a macroscopic mirror reflecting the microscopic state of our gut microbiome, if an autoimmune rash is literally just a text message from a starving enterocyte,
Oh,
it really makes you wonder about the rest of the cosmetic world.
how so?
Think about the surface-level flaws that we as a society spend hundreds of billions of dollars every single year trying to eradicate. I'm talking about cystic acne, premature cellular aging, rosacea, hyperpigmentation, the loss of elasticity. We scrub it, we laser it, we acid peel it, we inject it. But what if all of those cosmetic issues are just different variations of the exact same gut-skin axis alarm bells?
That completely destabilizes the premise of topical dermatology and aesthetics.
Could the future of the entire multi-billion-dollar skincare and beauty industry eventually abandon the skin entirely? Will the most effective, most sought-after anti-aging serum or acne treatment in the next decade be a highly personalized, genetically sequenced oral capsule designed entirely to modify the bacterial fermentation happening in your large intestine? It is a massive paradigm shift, and it is absolutely something to ponder the next time you find yourself standing in the skincare aisle, staring at a wall of $200 surface-level creams.